The three men didn't say a word when they cornered him. That was the part that scared her most. Not the way they moved, slow, deliberate, cutting off every exit with the quiet confidence of people who had done this before. Not the one on the left who kept his right hand tucked inside his jacket, fingers curled around something she couldn't see. Not even the man they had pinned against the brick wall, who stood so completely still it looked like he'd stopped breathing. What scared Evelyn Hartwell was the silence. Because in every mugging she'd ever heard about, somebody talked. Somebody demanded a wallet, a phone, a watch. Somebody threatened. Somebody begged. Nobody was talking here. And the man against the wall, charcoal suit, hands loose at his sides, dark eyes moving from face to face with something that wasn't fear, looked like he was calculating, not panicking, like a man counting bullets before a storm rolls in. Evelyn stood frozen in the mouth of that hallway, one hand still on the door she'd pushed open by mistake. Her heart was slamming. Her brain was screaming at her to back out, let the door swing shut, go find the actual restroom, go back to her drink, go back to her ordinary life. She didn't. She would spend a long time afterward trying to understand why. If you've ever watched someone about to get hurt and felt the moment split, the version of you that walks away, the version that doesn't, then you already know. You don't always choose. Sometimes your feet just move. Hers move forward. And if you're watching this right now, wherever you are, hit that subscribe button and stay with me, because this story is going to take you somewhere you didn't expect. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Don't go anywhere. You'll want to see what happens next. The night had started quietly enough, which, looking back, should have been the first warning. Evelyn didn't do quiet nights well anymore. Hadn't since Nathan died. Quiet nights had a way of expanding, filling every corner of whatever room she was in, leaving too much space for the kind of thinking she'd spent 3 years trying to outrun. So she usually worked late, or called her friend Dana, or put on something loud and brainless on her laptop and let it run until she fell asleep in her clothes. But tonight she'd let herself be talked into celebrating. The promotion wasn't a big one. Junior associate to associate, one rung on a ladder she couldn't always see the top of. Her supervisor, Marcus, had clapped her on the shoulder in the parking garage and said, "You earned this, Hartwell," and she'd smiled and meant it, mostly. She'd put in 4 years at Meridian Architecture Group. 4 years of drafting revisions nobody else wanted, showing up early, staying late, taking on the projects that made other associates groan. She'd earned it. But standing in the elevator that evening, watching the floors tick upward, she'd thought about Nathan. How he used to tease her about her ambition. How he'd say, "Evie, you work like you're running out of time," and she'd roll her eyes and tell him somebody had to. How he'd laughed. That particular laugh of his, low and a little reckless, the one that always made her feel like everything was going to be fine. Nathan had been dead for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She'd stopped counting weeks about 6 months in. Days she couldn't shake. The bar, Velour it was called, one of those downtown Chicago places that cost 3 times what it should and made you feel like you should have dressed better, had been Dana's idea. "Just one drink," Dana had texted. "You got promoted, not promoted to sainthood. You're allowed to go somewhere nice." So Evelyn had gone. She'd worn the gray dress she'd bought on sale 2 winters ago and barely touched since, the one with the wrap front that Nathan had told her made her look like she actually slept. She'd gotten a cab instead of the train because Dana said it was that kind of night. She'd walked into Velour and felt, for about 4 minutes, like she might actually enjoy herself. Then Dana had gotten a call, her babysitter, some crisis involving a broken screen door and a toddler who'd figured out how to climb, and left in a rush of apologies and half-finished wine. And Evelyn had stayed. She didn't know why. Stubbornness, maybe. Principle. She'd put on the dress and paid for the cab, and she wasn't going home to her apartment at 9:30 on a Friday to sit with the quiet. She'd ordered a second drink. Bourbon this time, because the first had been something with elderflower that Dana had chosen and that tasted like a garden party she hadn't been invited to. She'd sat at the far end of the bar with her back to the room and pretended she was the kind of person who did this, who sat alone in good places and didn't feel self-conscious about it. She'd been almost convincing herself when she'd needed to find the restroom. The place was laid out badly, or creatively, depending on how much you liked puzzles. The main floor opened into a mezzanine, which opened into a lounge, which had 2 different corridors that both looked like they led somewhere significant. She'd picked the wrong one, pushed through a door marked with a small brass plate she hadn't bothered to read, stepped into a narrower hallway lit with a different quality of light, lower, older, like it hadn't been renovated when the rest of the place had, and found herself looking at something she was not supposed to see. She understood that immediately. 3 men, one cornered. The silence. Her mind ran the calculation fast and wrong. Innocent man, danger, no one else here, do something. It didn't run. What kind of man stands that still when he's outnumbered 3-1? It didn't run. What kind of man has no fear in his eyes, only arithmetic? Evelyn's feet carried her forward before the rest of her caught up. She heard herself say, "There you are," in a voice she barely recognized, steadier than she felt, almost believable. And then she was crossing the distance between them, and there was no version of this where she stopped. The 3 men turned. The man against the wall looked at her. Just for a second, something crossed his face. Not surprise, exactly. More like recalibration. Like a chess player who'd expected one move and gotten another. Evelyn threw her arms around him and kissed him. She'd kissed 3 people in her life with anything she'd call real feeling. This was not like any of those. This was functional. A door you push to keep something out. She felt him go still for one beat, one single beat of total stillness. And then his hands came up to her waist, and he kissed her back like they'd been doing it for years, easy and unhurried, no performance in it, which was somehow worse. She pulled back. Her heart was doing something irregular. She turned to look at the 3 men like she hadn't just kissed a stranger to save him from something she didn't understand yet. "I've been looking everywhere," she said to the room, to nobody, to the fiction she was building one sentence at a time. "This place is a maze." The 3 men looked at each other, then at the man behind her, then back at her. Something passed between them that she couldn't read, a communication that didn't use words, and then the one on the left took a half step back. The man with his hand inside his jacket, the one Evelyn had clocked first, didn't move. "Your girlfriend," he said. Not a question. His voice had no particular accent, no particular feeling. It was the voice of a man who had already decided something and was checking his math. "Yes," the man behind her said. One word, no elaboration. The one with his hand in his jacket looked at Evelyn for a long moment. She made herself look back. Her palms were wet. Her mouth was dry. She could feel the stranger behind her, his hand still at her waist, light but present. And she understood suddenly, with a clarity that cut through the fear, that he was not going to help her if this went wrong. He was going to let it go wrong and handle it himself, after. She didn't know how she knew that. She knew it. The man with his hand in his jacket took one step toward her. "What's your name?" "Evelyn," she said. Then, because it was the first lie that came, because her mind was very fast when it was terrified, "Evelyn Falcone." She felt the man behind her go still again. A different kind of still this time. The one in front of her studied her face. She didn't look away. She'd spent 3 years learning to hold herself together when everything in her wanted to come apart. And she used every bit of that now, standing in a hallway she wasn't supposed to be in, next to a man she'd never met, lying to someone she did not want to make angry. Then the man with his hand in his jacket smiled. It didn't reach anything. "Tell your husband to be more careful," he said. And they left. All 3. Back down the corridor, through a different door, gone. Evelyn stood there for 3 seconds, counting her own breaths. Then she stepped away from the stranger and turned to look at him properly for the first time. He was taller than she'd registered, mid-30s, maybe closer to 40, the kind of face that aged well and knew it, not in a vain way, just factually. Dark hair. A jaw that looked like it had been decided on firmly, and those eyes, dark, steady, watching her with an expression she couldn't name. Not gratitude, not relief. Something more like assessment, like she was a variable he was still solving for. "Evelyn," he said. Her name, not a question, just confirming he'd heard it. "I'm going to need you to tell me that was nothing," she said. Her voice came out mostly level. She was proud of that. "That they were friends of yours, or it was a joke, or there's some reasonable explanation I'm going to feel silly for not thinking of." He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "Okay." She exhaled. "Okay. Well, I'm going to go back to the bar, and that's not a good idea." She stopped. "Excuse me?" You told them your name was Evelyn Falcone. He said it without inflection, like he was reciting a fact. That's not a name you give to people like that, and then walk away from. She felt the cold before the understanding arrived. Why not? Because Falcone is my name, he said, and the men you just lied to are going to remember yours. She stared at him. He looked back at her. The hallway was very quiet. Somewhere behind the walls, the muffled bass of the bar's sound system pressed against the silence. Who are you? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. He straightened his jacket, a small, unhurried gesture, the kind of thing you do when you're not afraid of the person asking. And then he looked at her with those measured eyes and said, Alexander Falcone. The name landed somewhere in her chest, not because she knew it, because of the way he said it, the way you say a name when it's also a warning. And those men, she started, were sent to kill me, he said. They didn't because of you. A pause. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite gratitude, not quite anything she had a word for. Which means they now know your name, your face, and that you matter to me. I don't matter to you, I don't know you. It doesn't matter what's true, Alexander said. It matters what they believe. She wanted to argue with that. The logic of it was already sinking in before she could find the words to push it back. Those men, she said carefully, are they going to come back? He looked at her for a long moment. Not those three, he said. She heard what he didn't say, the space around the words. Not those three, but someone will. I need to sit down, Evelyn said. Not here. I know not here. She pressed 2 fingers against her forehead. Just give me a second. He gave her the second. Didn't crowd her, didn't touch her, didn't offer anything. Just waited, like a man who'd learned that waiting was a form of control. She thought about Dana, who was probably home now, dealing with the screen door, unbothered. She thought about her apartment and her second bourbon she'd left on the bar and the gray dress Nathan would have liked. She thought about the version of this evening where she'd found the right corridor and just gone to the restroom like a normal person. What happens now? She asked. I'll have someone take you home, Alexander said. My people, not... He paused, and she understood the distinction without him finishing it. Not his enemies. You'll be safe tonight. Tonight, she repeated. He didn't insult her by softening it. She looked at him. This man she'd kissed in a hallway to save him from something she still didn't fully understand. This man with her last name now attached to her. This man whose eyes held something ancient and tired and very, very dangerous. And she thought, what have I done? It wasn't a question. It was a door swinging shut behind her. I work at Meridian Architecture Group, she said, on Michigan Avenue. If there's a problem, I need to know I can go to work. I know where you work, Alexander said. She stared at him. I don't mean that as a threat, he said, and she almost believed him. I mean that I will find out everything I need to know about you tonight, because I need to understand what I'm dealing with. That's not personal. That's how I stay alive. Do you stay alive often? She said. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one, maybe. A reflex he'd mostly unlearned. Often enough, he said. A door opened at the far end of the corridor. A large man in a dark suit appeared, scanned the hallway, and nodded at Alexander. My car is here, Alexander said. He looked at Evelyn. I'll have someone stay outside your building tonight. Don't contact the police. Don't tell anyone what happened. Go home, get some sleep, and tomorrow morning You'll what? She said. He looked at her steadily. I'll explain, he said. Everything you need to know. I owe you that much. You owe me considerably more than that, Evelyn said. Another ghost of a smile. There and gone. Yes, he said. I do. He walked toward the door at the end of the corridor. At the threshold he paused, and she thought he was going to say something significant, something that would make sense of the last 20 minutes. He just looked at her once more. That same calculation behind his eyes. Then he was gone, and she was alone in the hallway, in the wrong part of a bar she'd come to for one quiet drink, wearing a dead man's favorite dress, with a borrowed last name that 3 killers now knew. Evelyn stood there for a long moment. Then she straightened her back, the way she always had. The way you learn when you've been putting yourself back together for 3 years, one small piece at a time. She walked back out to the bar. She finished her drink. She paid her tab, tipped 20% because her mother raised her right, even when the world was falling apart around her, and walked out onto Michigan Avenue where a black car was already waiting at the curb. Engine running, driver not looking at her directly, which somehow felt more frightening than if he had. She got in. She didn't look back at Velour. She told herself she was calm. She told herself this was manageable. She told herself that by morning it would all look different. Outside the window, Chicago moved past in its usual way, indifferent and enormous and lit against the dark sky. And Evelyn Hartwell rode through it in a stranger's car carrying a stranger's name, with the feeling of his hand still faint at her waist, thinking, Nathan would have known what to do, but Nathan was gone. And whatever had just started, she was going to have to figure out on her own. She didn't sleep. That wasn't a surprise. She'd known in the car that sleep wasn't coming, known it the way you know a storm is moving in before the sky actually changes. Something in the pressure, something in the air that your body registers before your mind catches up. She'd gone through the motions anyway, changed out of the gray dress, hung it up because Nathan's voice was still in her head about treating good things with care. Washed her face. Sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall across from her for what felt like a long time. Then she'd gotten up and sat at her drafting table instead, because at least there she had something to do with her hands. She pulled out a project she'd been stalling on, a residential commission, a family in Lincoln Park who wanted an addition that didn't look like an addition. And she worked until the windows went gray and then pale gold, and then the particular flat white of early Chicago morning. She worked with the mechanical precision of someone who learned a long time ago that forward motion was the only way to keep the dark from settling. At 6:40, she heard a car door outside. She went to the window. 3 floors down, a black SUV sat at the curb where the black sedan had been the night before. Same plates, she thought, and then realized she hadn't actually looked at the plates last night. She was just telling herself she had, because it made her feel less helpless to think she'd been paying attention. She wasn't helpless. She was exhausted and frightened and running on no sleep, which was different. She showered, made coffee, stood in her kitchen drinking it, and thought about what Alexander Falcone had said. I'll explain. Tomorrow morning. He hadn't said where, he hadn't said when. He'd just said it like it was a fact that didn't require the usual logistics, like the world arranged itself around his schedule as a matter of course. She was still thinking about that when her intercom buzzed at 7:15. She pressed the button. Yes. Ms. Hartwell. A man's voice, flat and professional. Mr. Falcone is downstairs. She looked at her coffee cup, looked at the clock, looked at the drafting table covered in pencil marks and eraser dust. Tell him to wait, she said. A pause. Ma'am. 5 minutes, she said, and let go of the button. She finished her coffee standing at the kitchen counter. She took 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Then she picked up her bag, put her keys in her pocket, and went downstairs. He was in the lobby. Not outside by the car like she'd expected. In the lobby, standing near the mailboxes, wearing a different suit than last night. Navy this time. No tie. He looked like he hadn't slept either, but on him it read differently than it did on her. On her it was visible. She'd seen it in the bathroom mirror, the bruising under her eyes, the particular flatness of a face that had been awake too long. On him it looked like a condition he'd long since made peace with. He had a cup of coffee in each hand. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the cups. You don't know how I take it. Black, he said. You look like someone who takes it black. She almost said that's not how that works, but he was right, so she took the cup instead. My office, she said. You came to my office. We should talk somewhere private. We're talking here. He looked around the lobby, the mailboxes, the old tile floor, the intercom panel with its cracked plastic. Here's fine, he said, and she understood he meant it. He'd talk wherever she was comfortable, which was either genuine consideration or a very good imitation of it, and at 7:15 on no sleep, she wasn't in a position to tell the difference. You said you'd explain everything, she said. Yes. Start with the men from last night. He didn't hesitate, which she noted. Some people, when they're deciding how much truth to give you, pause. He didn't. They work for a man named Declan O'Rourke. He runs an organization that operates out of the South Side. We've been in conflict for about 18 months. Conflict, she repeated. That's the word I'm using. Because the real word is worse. He looked at her. Yes. She took a sip of the coffee. It was good, better than hers, which meant someone had gotten it from somewhere specific, which meant he'd thought about this before he showed up, which told her something. She wasn't sure what yet. And those 3 men were supposed to kill you. Yes. But they didn't. No. Because I walked in. He was quiet for a moment. Because you walked in, he confirmed, and because the situation changed in a way that made killing me immediately less useful than watching what happened next. They wanted to see what you'd do. They wanted to see what you'd do, he said, or who you were, whether you were actually someone I'd brought, whether you were a liability. And now they think I'm your wife, she said. They think you're someone I care about enough to protect, he corrected, which in their world amounts to the same thing. Evelyn set her coffee cup on top of the mailboxes. She crossed her arms. Outside on Michigan Avenue, traffic was beginning to build. The particular sound of a city waking up, indifferent to the conversation happening inside this lobby, indifferent to all of it. You said something last night, that my brother, that Nathan. She stopped, started again. You said his death wasn't random. Alexander's expression shifted. Not much. The way a current changes underwater. You can't see it directly, only in what moves on the surface. I said there were things you needed to know. That was one of them. Tell me now. Evelyn, don't, she said. Her voice came out harder than she'd intended, and she didn't apologize for it. Don't use my name like that, like you're handling me. Just tell me. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Your brother worked for a firm called Callaway Forensic Associates. For about 8 months before he died, he was contracted to audit financial records for a real estate development company on the North Shore. She knew the firm. Nathan had mentioned it, had been proud of the contract, actually, had said it was the biggest account they'd landed that year. She'd been happy for him. She'd made him dinner to celebrate. That development company, Alexander continued, was a front. The real estate was legitimate on paper. The money moving through it wasn't. Nathan found discrepancies in the accounts, significant ones, enough to trace if someone knew what they were looking at. He knew what he was looking at, Evelyn said. Her voice was very controlled. That was his job. He knew exactly what he was looking at, Alexander said, and he made the mistake of documenting it. The lobby felt smaller. She became aware of the walls in a way she hadn't been before. He was killed because he found something. He was killed because he found something and because the wrong people learned he'd found it, Alexander said. The development company had connections to O'Rourke's operation, deep connections, the kind you bury under 3 layers of legitimate business so that even a good forensic accountant needs months to get to them. Nathan got to them in 8 months, she said. He was apparently very good. She turned away from him, looked at the mailboxes. Her name was on one of them, E. Hartwell, slot 14, the label she'd printed out and laminated because the building super kept losing them. She stared at her own last name and felt something enormous moving inside her chest, something she'd kept compressed for 3 years, and she breathed through it the way she'd learned to breathe through things. The police said it was a robbery gone wrong, she said. I know what the police said. Did O'Rourke? She stopped, made herself finish it. Did he order it? Not directly, Alexander said. But the order came from people who answer to him, which is the same thing. She turned back around. She needed to see his face when she asked the next one. How long have you known this? He held her eyes. About 2 years? The air went out of her. 2 years? She said. You've known for 2 years that my brother was murdered. I've known the shape of it, he said, and his voice was steady, which somehow made it worse. Confirmation of the details took longer. You needed, she said. You needed. My mother spent 2 years believing her son died for $20 and a phone he didn't even have on him. I spent 2 years. She stopped. The thing in her chest was pressing hard now. 2 years thinking it was random, that it was just the city being what the city is, that it was nobody's fault. I understand. You don't get to say that to me, she said. Not right now. You don't get to say you understand. He was quiet. He took it. She'd half expected him to push back. Some men did, when you came at them directly. Some men had a reflex to argue or deflect or reframe. He just absorbed it and waited. And she hated that it was the right thing to do because it made it harder to be angry at him. She was still angry. She was going to stay angry. But she needed it to be useful. What were you doing with this information? She said. For 2 years. Building a case against O'Rourke, he said. Not the kind you take to a courthouse. The kind that ends this permanently. You were planning to kill him. He didn't flinch from it. I was planning to dismantle what he built and make sure he couldn't rebuild it. What happens to him in that process is a detail, she said flatly. A consequence, he said. She picked her coffee back up. Not because she wanted it. She needed something to do with her hands, because they wanted to shake and she wasn't going to let them. And now, she said, what happens now, with me in the middle of this? That's what I came to tell you. He set his own cup on the tile floor, a small gesture, freeing his hands, and she noticed him do it. O'Rourke knows your name. By now he's likely run it, found your address, your employer, your connection to Nathan. He's good at pulling threads. So he already knows about Nathan, she said. He already knows who I am in relation to all of this. Possibly. Not possibly. Probably. Probably, he agreed. She put it together because she was good at putting things together. It was what her mind did with problems. Turned them, looked at the angles, found the load-bearing points. So I can't go to work. I can't go home. I can't. The scale of it hit her. You're telling me my life is not my life anymore. I'm telling you it's not safe until this is resolved. And how long does that take? He didn't answer. Alexander. She said his name deliberately. If he was going to use hers like it meant something, she was going to use his back the same way. How long? I don't know, he said. I won't lie to you about that. She stared at him. He stared back. Outside, someone honked, a long, irritated sound, and then it faded into the general noise of morning. I have a job, she said. I have a life. I have a... She stopped before she said mother, because if she said it, she'd have to think about her mother. And if she thought about her mother, she'd have to think about what O'Rourke's people might do to reach her. And she needed to take this one thing at a time, or it was all going to collapse. I need to call my firm. I have someone who can handle that. I'll handle it myself, she said. I'll call Marcus and tell him I have a family emergency. Which is true. It's extraordinarily true. Something moved through his eyes. Not quite amusement. Too tired for that. But something adjacent to it. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out. Unknown number. She looked at Alexander. Don't answer it, he said. He'd straightened deep. A small, barely visible shift, but she caught it. He was reading the room differently now. Faster. Why? Because if O'Rourke's people are already calling, this conversation took longer than it should have. He moved toward the lobby door and looked out the narrow window beside it, scanning the street. The black SUV was still there. So was another car, parked half a block down, that she hadn't noticed before. We need to go. I'm not going anywhere without knowing where... My estate, he said. Outside the city. It's secure. You'll have your own space. You won't be... You want to take me to your house, she said. I want to take you somewhere O'Rourke can't reach you while I finish what I started. Her phone buzzed again. Same number. If I go with you, she said, I need your word that I can leave when this is over. That I'm not a... She chose the word carefully. A guest who can't go home. He looked at her for a long moment. Whatever he was measuring in her face, he seemed to find enough of it. You have my word, he said. She didn't know if his word was worth anything. She had no basis to evaluate it. She had one night's worth of data on this man, and most of it was terrifying. She pocketed her phone. I need to get some things from upstairs. 5 minutes, he said. You're doing that again, she said. Doing what? Giving me a time limit on my own life. He had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable. Take what you need, he said. I'll wait. She went upstairs. She moved fast. 3 years of Nathan telling her she overthought everything had left her with a capacity for decisive action when the alternative was worse. She pulled a bag from her closet and filled it with the practical things first: clothes, toiletries, charger. Then she stood in the middle of her bedroom and looked at the drafting table, the framed print Nathan had given her the Christmas before he died, the small collection of things that made this apartment hers. She took the framed print, wrapped it in a sweater, put it in the bag. She didn't know why she felt like that was important. She just did. She was back in the lobby in 4 minutes. The drive to Alexander's estate took 40 minutes, and neither of them said much. She sat in the back seat. He'd taken the front, beside the driver, which surprised her, and watched Chicago give way to its edges and then to the kind of landscape that existed just outside cities, neither urban nor fully rural, just the in-between country of old trees and long fences and the occasional gas station. The estate emerged gradually. First the wall, high, stone, running along the road for longer than she'd expected. Then the gate, iron, no ornamentation. Then the drive, gravel giving way to paved, curving through trees dense enough that she lost sight of the road behind her before she had sight of the house ahead. Then the house itself. It was large. She'd known it would be large. She was an architect. She'd looked at enough buildings to calibrate scale at a distance, and whatever she'd expected had still underestimated it, not ostentatious. That was the first thing she registered professionally, before she could stop herself from registering things professionally. Whoever had designed this had understood that the point wasn't to announce wealth, but to contain it. Stone and dark timber. Clean lines where the structure allowed them. A building that wanted to belong to its landscape even while dominating it. She hated that it was beautiful. She would have found it easier if it wasn't. Inside, Alexander gave her the tour in the clipped, efficient way of a man who lived in a space so thoroughly that he'd stopped seeing it. A woman named Clara, 50s, gray-streaked hair, a face that gave nothing away, met them at the door and showed Evelyn to a room on the second floor. Large windows. A desk. A door that locked from the inside, which Evelyn checked immediately, and which Clara watched her check without comment. "Lunch is at 1, Clara said. "If you need anything before then, dial 2 on the house phone." "Thank you," Evelyn said. Clara left. Evelyn stood in the middle of the room with her bag at her feet and the framed print still wrapped in the sweater and thought, "This is real. This is actually my life right now." She unpacked, because it was something to do and because the alternative was sitting down and letting the full weight of the morning settle on her, and she wasn't ready for that yet. She called Marcus at 8:45. "Family emergency," she said. "Personal situation." She was sorry for the short notice. Marcus, who was fundamentally decent beneath his ambition, told her to take what she needed and check in when she could. She thanked him and hung up before he could ask questions, because she didn't have answers that wouldn't end her career or his peace of mind. She didn't see Alexander until noon. He knocked, which she appreciated, even if she also knew that a man who owned the building could do as he liked. "Come in," she said. He stood in the doorway. He'd changed. A simpler shirt, darker, the jacket gone. He looked, in this setting, less like the figure from last night and more like a man in his own house, which should have made him less threatening and somehow didn't. "I want to show you something," he said. He led her downstairs through the main hallway into a room off the back of the house that she hadn't seen in the tour. A study, wall-length bookshelves, a long table, a series of files laid out in a specific order that she could tell was meaningful. He'd been working in here. The coffee cup was still on the corner of the desk, and the files were arranged with the particular controlled disorder of someone mid-process. "Nathan's case," he said. He stood back, let her approach the table. She looked at the files. Her brother's name on a tab, in Alexander's handwriting. Financial records. Photographs. Documents with redactions she could see had been added after the fact, by different hands. A timeline on a legal pad, dated 18 months back. "This is everything you have," she said. "This is everything relevant to your brother. There's more, the broader investigation into O'Rourke. But this is what you need to see." She read. He waited. She took her time because the information deserved it, and because she'd learned long ago that speed was how you missed things. Financial trails, a sequence of transactions that ran through 4 different shell companies before anything could be traced back to the real estate development firm. Nathan's notes. She recognized his handwriting on a photograph of a copied document, the neat, precise print he'd had since childhood. And then the gap. The point where the note stopped and didn't resume. The point where Nathan stopped. She put the photograph down. Her hand was steady. She was proud of that too. "He found it," she said. "He found the connection to O'Rourke's money." "He found it and wrote it up and sent it to his supervisor at Callaway," Alexander said. "His supervisor passed it up the chain. Someone at the top of that chain had a relationship with the development company. Nathan's report never went anywhere official, but someone made sure O'Rourke knew it existed. And Nathan, yes." She looked at the timeline on the legal pad. The last date on it was 3 days before her brother died. "You've had this for 2 years," she said. "Why not take it to someone? The FBI, Because the people it implicates are connected to people who are connected to the FBI," Alexander said. It wasn't bitterness in his voice, just fact. The fact of a man who had spent a long time operating in a world where that was simply the condition. O'Rourke has had 20 years to build relationships that protect him. You don't undo that with a file. "So what do you undo it with?" He looked at her. "What I've been building toward for 18 months. She understood then what that meant. Not the mechanics, she didn't need the mechanics, but the shape of it, the end game he was working toward, the kind of resolution that didn't involve courtrooms. "And I'm in the way of that now," she said. "You're not in the way. You're—" He paused, looking for the honest version. "You're a new variable, one I have to account for." "A liability," she said. "No." He said it firmly, and she looked at him because of the firmness. "No. What you did last night, stepping into that hallway, making the choice you made, that's not a liability. That's—" He stopped again. He wasn't a man who reached for words easily. She was starting to understand that. He thought before he spoke, and when he couldn't find the right thing, he went quiet rather than filling the space. Most people in that hallway would have backed out and walked away. Very few people wouldn't. "I couldn't walk away," she said. "I thought you were going to die." "I know. I wasn't being brave, I was just—" She shook her head. "I didn't think." "Sometimes that's what brave looks like," he said. She looked at him for a moment. This man she'd known for less than 18 hours, standing in his study, surrounded by the evidence of a war she'd accidentally walked into, and thought, "You're not what I expected either." She didn't say it. "I want to be useful," she said instead. "If I'm going to be here, if my life is on hold anyway, I want to do something with it, not sit in a room waiting. Evelyn, I'm an architect. I understand systems. I understand how structures work, how they fail, where the weak points are. The kind of reading I just did." She gestured at the table. "Give me the rest. The broader investigation. Let me look at it." He studied her. Whatever the calculation was, she watched it run. "We'll see," he said. It wasn't yes, but it wasn't no. She was about to push it further when a phone on the desk buzzed. Alexander picked it up, looked at the screen, and his face did something she hadn't seen it do yet. Not fear. She was starting to think fear wasn't an option his expression kept available, but something harder, darker, more compressed. "What is it?" she said. He looked up at her. "O'Rourke made a move this morning." He turned the phone so she could see the screen. A photograph. Taken from a distance, a telephoto lens grainy but clear enough. A building she recognized immediately. The clean glass facade of Meridian Architecture Group on Michigan Avenue. And in the frame, visible through the lobby window, Marcus at the reception desk. Her stomach dropped. "He's sending a message," Alexander said. "To me," she said. "To both of us." He set the phone down. His jaw was set, and she saw the effort it took to keep his voice level. "He's telling us he knows your life, your job, your colleagues, and that he can reach them." She thought about Marcus telling her to take what she needed. Marcus who had no idea. Marcus who was just a decent man at a reception desk who'd gotten there early, the way he always did. "Call him," she said. "Someone needs to call Marcus, and—" "We can't tip O'Rourke that we know he's watching," Alexander said. "If we move Marcus, he knows the message landed. He'll escalate." "And if we don't move Marcus, then we work faster," Alexander said. His voice was flat now, operational. "I need to make some calls. Clara will—" "Don't tell me Clara will bring me lunch," Evelyn said. "Don't manage me right now." He stopped, looked at her fully. "I'm not managing you," he said. "I'm telling you that I need an hour to handle this, and then I'll tell you what I know." She held his eyes. He held hers back. Neither of them moved. "1 hour," she said. "1 hour," he agreed. She went back upstairs. She stood at the window of her borrowed room and looked out at the grounds. The trees, the gate she could barely see through the distance, the edge of the wall, and breathed through the tightness in her chest. She'd come here to be safe. She understood now that safe was a relative term. She understood that the photograph of Marcus was a door closing behind her, another one, and that somewhere out there a man she'd never met was pulling threads she hadn't known connected to her, connecting them to each other, making a net. What she didn't understand, not yet, was that the most dangerous thread he was pulling wasn't the one that led to Marcus or to the estate or even to Alexander. It was the one that led to the man inside Alexander's organization who had already told O'Rourke exactly where Evelyn was. The hour passed. Then another one. Evelyn sat at the desk in her borrowed room and did what she always did when waiting became unbearable. She worked. She'd asked Clara for paper, and Clara had brought a legal pad and 2 pencils without asking why, which told Evelyn something about the kind of household this was, the kind of request Clara had learned not to question. Evelyn drew. Not architecture exactly, more like the habit of architecture, the instinct to look at a space and understand its bones. She sketched the layout of the estate from memory, the way the hallways connected, where the sightlines were, where they weren't. It was something Nathan used to tease her about. You walk into a party and you're already drawing the floor plan in your head. She told him it was professional habit. He told her it was a personality disorder, and she'd laughed and thrown a coaster at him. She pressed the pencil harder into the paper than she needed to. At 2:15, Alexander knocked. She didn't say come in this time. She opened the door herself because she needed to feel like she still controlled something, even if it was just a door. He looked worse than he had at noon, not visibly. His face didn't do worse visibly, she was learning that. But something in the set of his shoulders was different, tighter, like a structure under a load it hadn't been designed for. Come downstairs, he said. Tell me here. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. She stepped back and let him in, and he came in and stood in the center of the room the way he always stood, like he was assessing the space before he committed to it. The photograph of your office was sent to me directly, he said, to my private number. O'Rourke doesn't have that number. She absorbed that. Meaning someone gave it to him. Meaning someone inside my organization gave it to him. He said it steadily, but she heard what was under the steadiness. The particular cold of a man who'd just confirmed something he'd hoped wasn't true. I've had a problem for about 3 weeks. Messages getting out before they should. O'Rourke moving in places he shouldn't know about. I thought it was surveillance, external. But it's not external, she said. No. She sat down on the edge of the bed. Not because she felt weak, because she needed to think, and she thought better when she wasn't standing. Who knows we're here? Here? Who knows this location? 12 people, he said. My senior staff, people I've worked with for years. Years doesn't mean loyal, she said. Something crossed his face, fast, almost invisible. She'd hit something true and painful, and she hadn't meant to, but she didn't take it back either because it needed to be said. No, he agreed. It doesn't. So what do we do? I'm already pulling records. Communications logs, movements over the past month. I'll find it. He said, I'll find it the way you say something you're absolutely sure of and absolutely furious about in the same breath. And until then, nobody leaves this estate. Nobody contacts anyone outside without going through me. And you, he stopped. And I what? You stay in this building, he said. Not the grounds, the building. She wanted to argue. She looked at his face and understood that this was not a negotiation point, not right now, not with a mole inside his organization and O'Rourke already watching Michigan Avenue. Fine, she said. He turned to leave. Alexander. He stopped. The files. The broader investigation. You said we'd see. He was quiet for a moment, then, Clara will bring them up. He left. She sat with the legal pad in her lap and the pencil in her hand, and the sketch of the estate's floor plan staring back at her, and she thought about Nathan, about what it meant that his death had been a message inside a war she'd known nothing about what it meant that she was now inside that same war, in this building, with a man who didn't know which of his 12 closest people had decided to sell them both. She thought about trust, about how it was built and how fast it came apart. Clara brought the files at 3. There were more than she'd expected. 4 accordion folders, a separate binder, a sealed envelope that Clara set on the desk with the specific care of someone who knew what was inside it and had decided not to think about it. Evelyn thanked her. Clara nodded once and left. Evelyn opened the first folder and started reading. She was systematic about it, another Nathan trait, or maybe just a shared family habit, the two of them raised by a woman who believed that any problem had an answer if you were willing to sit with it long enough. She read chronologically. She made notes on the legal pad. She built a map on a second sheet. Not geographic, structural. The shape of O'Rourke's organization as Alexander's files described it. The nodes and connections. The legitimate businesses and the ones that were legitimate on paper only. 2 hours in, she found Nathan's name for the second time. It was in a document she almost skipped. A report from one of Alexander's contacts inside the city planning office, dated 14 months ago, flagging an unusual number of development permits being approved for properties near the lakeshore. Routine enough on its face, but attached to it was a note, handwritten in different ink than the report. Callaway audit, Hartwell report, suppressed at source. Contact, V. Morrow, Callaway senior partner. V. Morrow. She knew that name, Vincent Morrow. Nathan had mentioned him, had said he was difficult to work for, demanding, the kind of man who believed every junior associate existed to make him look good. Nathan had said it without real bitterness. He'd dealt with worse. She sat with the note for a long time. Vincent Morrow had received Nathan's report. Vincent Morrow had suppressed it, which meant Vincent Morrow had either been afraid of what it contained, afraid enough to bury it rather than report it, or had been paid to bury it, or both. Fear and money usually lived close together. She picked up the sealed envelope. It wasn't sealed anymore. She could see the flap had been opened and repressed, not taped, just tucked. She opened it. Inside were photographs. 8 of them, printed on standard paper, the quality of security footage screenshots. A parking garage. 2 men, one of whom she didn't recognize, one of whom was wearing a jacket she'd seen before. She was sure of it, the particular cut, the dark green. And then she placed it, and her hands went cold. The jacket belonged to a man named Garrett. She'd seen him yesterday, this morning, in the lobby of her building, one of Alexander's security team. The man who'd driven the black SUV, who'd been there when she came downstairs and gotten into Alexander's car. Garrett. In a parking garage, talking to a man she didn't recognize. The timestamp on the photograph was 48 hours ago. She sat absolutely still. Then she picked up the house phone and dialed 2. Clara answered. "I need to speak with Alexander," Evelyn said. "Now, not in an hour. Now." 3 minutes later, Alexander came through the door. He saw her face and went still in the doorway. "What did you find?" She held up the photograph. He crossed the room in 4 steps and took it from her. She watched his face while he looked at it, watched the recognition arrive, and then the calculation, and then something that moved through his jaw like a current, brief, almost invisible, and very controlled. He looked at the timestamp. "Garrett," she said, because she wanted to hear how he said the name. "Garrett," he repeated, flat, emptied of everything. "He was in your lobby this morning," she said. "He drove the car." "I know." His voice was very quiet, the kind of quiet that had weight in it. "He knew where we were going before we got there. He was in that parking garage 2 days ago." "I know," Alexander said again. He set the photograph down on the desk with the careful deliberateness of a man keeping his hands controlled. "I know what this means. Do you know the man he's talking to?" A pause. "Yes." "Who is he?" Alexander didn't answer immediately, and that pause told her as much as the answer would. "His name is Reeves. He works for O'Rourke's operation, mid-level, liaison." "A liaison," she said. "Someone who passes things between parties who don't want direct contact." She looked at the photograph again. At Garrett, a man who'd stood in her lobby that morning, who'd held open the car door, who'd been inside Alexander's organization long enough to have a private number, to know locations, to know exactly where Evelyn Hartwell was being taken and exactly how to pass that information out. "He's the one who sent O'Rourke the photograph of my office," she said. "Almost certainly. Which means O'Rourke knows where I am right now." The silence that followed was half a second long, and it was the loudest half-second she'd experienced since the hallway at Velour. Alexander was already moving. He pulled out his phone, and she heard him say one word to whoever answered. Not a name, not an explanation, just, "Now." He hung up. He looked at her. "Get your bag," he said. "We're moving to the East Wing. The security configuration is different there. Independent system, separate access codes. If Garrett's been feeding them access information, it won't include the East Wing because I changed those codes 3 days ago and Garrett doesn't know." 3 days ago, she said, "before you knew about the leak." "Routine," he said. "I rotate security codes on a schedule that not everyone knows. It's the one variable that might hold. He was moving toward the door. Bag. Now. She grabbed the bag. She grabbed the accordion folders too, stacking them fast, the files Alexander had given her. He looked at the files and then at her and didn't tell her to leave them. She took that as permission. The East Wing was a different quality of silence. She felt it as soon as Alexander closed the door behind them. The particular hush of a space that was prepared rather than merely furnished. The windows were smaller here, set higher in the walls. The only door in had a keypad Alexander shielded with his body as he entered the code. 2 of his men were already there. Not Garrett, she noted immediately, and she thought Alexander had noted it too. A man named Corso, thick-necked and quiet, who she'd seen but never spoken to. And a woman she hadn't seen before, standing near the window with a phone to her ear, who finished her call as they came in and looked at Alexander with an expression that said the news was not good. "Talk," Alexander said. The woman, 30s, dark hair cropped short, the kind of face that had made a decision a long time ago about what it was willing to look like, said, "Garrett left the estate 40 minutes ago. Told the gate team you'd sent him on an errand. They let him out." Alexander's jaw tightened, and the gate team didn't call to verify. "He had clearance. They said he always has clearance." "Not anymore." He turned to Corso. "Get the gate team in here and find out if Garrett is still on property." "He's not," the woman said. "I already checked. He's gone." The room was quiet for a moment. Evelyn sat on the edge of a chair near the wall and watched these 3 people reconfigure around a problem. Watched the way it happened, the specific grammar of it, people who had done this before and knew their roles. She was outside the grammar and she knew it, but she wasn't going to be invisible about it. "He'll tell O'Rourke about the East Wing," she said. All 3 of them looked at her. "You changed the codes 3 days ago," she said to Alexander. "Garrett doesn't know them, but he knows the wing exists. He knows it's where you'd go if you suspected a breach. He'll tell O'Rourke the building's layout, and O'Rourke will figure out the rest." She paused. "How long before he can move on this location?" Alexander and the woman exchanged a look. "Hours," Alexander said. "Not many." "Then we can't stay here either," Evelyn said. "We have a contingency location," the woman said. Her eyes moved to Evelyn, assessing. "Outside the city. Different state." "Different state takes time," Evelyn said. "How much time do we have?" "Stop," Alexander said, and she looked at him, and he wasn't telling her to stop in the way she expected. Not stop talking, stop involving yourself. He was looking at her with that recalibrating expression she'd first seen in the velour hallway, the chess player look, the one he got when a move happened that he hadn't anticipated. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we're being reactive," she said. "We find out Garrett is the leak, and now we're moving location, and tomorrow we find the next thing and we move again. O'Rourke is driving this. You're not." "We don't have enough information to go on offense yet," Alexander said. "What information do you need?" He was quiet. "Because I have 4 folders of your research," she said, "and I spent 2 hours reading it, and if you give me another 2 hours and someone who can answer my questions, I can tell you what I see. From the outside. The structural weak points in what O'Rourke has built." She held his gaze. "I'm not a strategist and I'm not a soldier and I don't know how your world works, but I know how structures fail. It's literally what I do." The woman near the window was watching Evelyn with an expression that had shifted from assessing to something else. Not quite respect, not yet, but the consideration that precedes it. Alexander said, "Her name is Petra. She runs my intelligence operation." He looked at Petra. "Sit with her. Answer what she asks." Petra pulled up a chair. They worked for 2 hours while Alexander moved through the wing, making calls she could half hear through the walls. His voice controlled and low and occasionally very flat, in a way that she was starting to understand meant the conversation was going badly for the other person. Corso came and went. Clara appeared once with food nobody ate and disappeared again. Evelyn spread the files across the floor. There wasn't a large enough table, and walked Petra through what she'd built. The structural map of O'Rourke's organization, the nodes, the connections, the places where legitimate and illegitimate intersected, where you could pull one thread and watch 3 others tighten. Petra added what Evelyn didn't have: names for the unnamed nodes, context for the connections, the history behind transactions that looked arbitrary until you knew where the bodies had been buried, metaphorically and otherwise. At the intersection of an hour and a half of this, Evelyn put her finger on a name in the files. Callaway Forensic Associates, she said. Vincent Morrow, senior partner. He suppressed Nathan's report. She kept her voice even. She'd gotten good at it. Is he still connected to O'Rourke's operation? Petra looked at her steadily. Yes. Is the connection documented? We have evidence of 3 payments, 2 years apart. One was made. Petra stopped. When? Evelyn said. Petra's jaw moved slightly. The 3rd payment was made 6 days after your brother died. The floor felt very solid under Evelyn's feet. She was sitting on it, cross-legged, surrounded by papers, and the solidity of it was the only thing she was sure of for a moment. He was paid, she said, for suppressing the report, and then paid again after Nathan. She stopped. He was paid for both. That's what the evidence suggests, Petra said. She sat with that for a while. Petra didn't try to soften it, which Evelyn was grateful for. She'd had enough of people trying to soften things. Can it be proven? She said finally. In a court of law. Probably not without the original report, which Nathan sent to Morrow, and which Morrow almost certainly destroyed. Nathan kept copies, Evelyn said. Petra went still. He kept copies of everything, Evelyn said. It was a habit he had. Our mother used to say he was born paranoid. He'd laugh and say he was born prepared. She looked at the floor. He kept a backup drive. He kept one at his apartment and one at... She stopped. Where? Petra said. Evelyn looked up. My mother's house, she said, in Evanston. He kept a backup drive at my mother's house, in a box of his things that my mother never went through because she couldn't bring herself to. He mentioned it once, said if anything ever happened to his apartment, his work was safe. The room was very quiet. If that drive still exists, Evelyn said, and if Nathan was as thorough as I know he was, it has the original report, the documentation of what he found. Petra stood up and went to the door and said Alexander's name. He came in. Petra told him in 3 sentences what Evelyn had said. He listened without interrupting, which she'd come to understand was how he always listened, fully and without performing the listening. When Petra finished, Alexander looked at Evelyn. Your mother, he said. Is she safe right now? Does O'Rourke have any reason to... My mother doesn't know anything, Evelyn said. She's a retired teacher in Evanston. She thinks her son died in a robbery. But if O'Rourke's people are pulling threads, then we need to get to that drive before they do, Evelyn said, and we need to get my mother out of that house. The air in the room changed. She felt it. The particular shift of a situation becoming more concrete, variables becoming objects, strategy becoming motion. I'll send people to Evanston, Alexander said. I'm going with them, Evelyn said. No. She's my mother, Evelyn said. She doesn't know your people. She doesn't trust strangers, especially men in dark cars, especially since Nathan died. She'll panic. She won't cooperate. She might... She stopped herself before she said call the police, because calling the police was a complication nobody needed right now. I need to be there. I can get her out in 10 minutes. Without me, it could take an hour, and we don't have an hour. Alexander looked at her for a long moment. She could see the calculation running, the same one it always was with him, risk versus need, the weight of competing variables. I go, she said. Corso goes. One more of your people, whoever Petra recommends. Small, fast, no convoy. We go and come back before O'Rourke knows we've moved. Garrett knows your connection to your mother, Alexander said. He had access to your background file. He'll have passed that to O'Rourke. Then we move now, while they're still figuring out the estate situation, she said. We have a window, small, but it's there. She watched him decide. Watched it happen in real time, the exact moment the calculation resolved. 45 minutes, he said. There and back. If anything goes sideways. I know, she said. She didn't know what she was agreeing to. She said it anyway. They took a car she hadn't seen before. Older, a dark blue sedan. Nothing that would draw a second look. Corso drove. Petra's recommendation for the 3rd person turned out to be a quiet man named Hale, who sat in the back beside Evelyn and said nothing the entire drive, which she appreciated because she had too much running through her head to make conversation. It was dark by the time they reached Evanston. Full night, the residential streets lit with the amber light of old neighborhoods, the trees overhead still thick with summer. Her mother's house, the house she'd grown up in, the house Nathan had grown up in, the one with the garden her mother maintained with the specific devotion of a woman who needed something to outlast her grief, was dark in the front windows. That was normal. Her mother went to bed early. Corso pulled to the curb 2 houses down. Evelyn got out, and Hale got out with her, and she said, "Let me go first. Give me 60 seconds. If you come in and she's standing in the kitchen in her bathrobe, she'll have a heart attack." Hale looked at her, then he nodded. She walked to her mother's front door and knocked in the pattern they'd had since she was 12. 2 short, 1 long, 2 short. A code for "it's us, you're safe." Her mother had started it after a break-in 2 streets over back in 2009 and never stopped. The lights came on in the front hallway. The door opened, and her mother, small, gray-haired, the kind of woman whose face still had her daughter's eyes in it, looked at Evelyn and said, "Evelyn, what are you—" and then saw Hale, who had come up the walk after all, and went rigid. "Mom," Evelyn said quickly. "Mom, it's okay. He's with me. I need you to listen to me, and I need you to do it fast. Can you do that?" Her mother looked at her for a long moment. "You look terrible," she said. "I know, Mom." "Come inside," her mother said. The resignation of a woman who'd raised 2 children to adulthood and understood that crises arrived without appointments. Inside, standing in the kitchen where she'd eaten 10,000 breakfasts, Evelyn told her mother as much as she could in as few words as possible. Not everything. Not the full shape of it. Not Alexander. Not what happened at Velour. But Nathan. The part about Nathan. That his death had not been random. That he'd found something. And that the something was still out there. Her mother sat at the kitchen table and listened without speaking. Her hands were flat on the table surface, very still, the way Evelyn's hands got when she was holding herself together. "The drive," Evelyn said. "Nathan's backup drive. Do you still have his things?" "In the closet," her mother said, quiet. "The blue box. I need it, and I need you to come with me tonight, just for a few days. I'll explain more when you're safe." Her mother looked at her. "Is this connected to the people who killed my son?" The word "killed" landed in the room like something dropped. "Yes," Evelyn said. Her mother stood up. "I'll get the box," she said. "And my bag. Give me 10 minutes." Evelyn exhaled. It took 8. The drive back was quiet. Her mother sat in the back seat with Evelyn, the blue box on her lap, her hands wrapped around it with the grip of a woman holding something that was the last thing she had of someone she'd lost. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't look at Corso or Hale. She just looked out the window at the nighttime suburbs sliding past and breathed. Halfway back, Hale's phone lit up. He read the screen and his posture changed. Evelyn caught it, the small tightening, the shoulders pulling in. He typed something fast. Put the phone down. "What is it?" she said. "The estate," he said. She waited. "O'Rourke's people moved on it," he said. 20 minutes ago, East Wing." The cold came fast and complete. "Alexander." "Already clear," Hale said. "He moved out 20 minutes before they hit. He knew." A pause. "But the estate is compromised. We don't have a location to return to." She looked at the blue box in her mother's hands. The drive inside it, the documentation of everything Nathan had found, the evidence that could dismantle what O'Rourke had spent 20 years building. And then she thought about the word location, about having no location to return to, about Alexander out there somewhere in the city with O'Rourke's people closing in and a mole already extracted and a war that had just moved from cold to hot in the space of a single evening. She thought about what she'd said to Alexander that afternoon. "O'Rourke is driving this. You're not." She thought about what it would take to change that. Her mother reached over in the dark of the back seat and took Evelyn's hand. Didn't say anything, just took it, the way mothers do when they understand the shape of something without needing the details. Evelyn held on and looked out the window and felt the drive beneath them and thought, everything is different now. Not in the way things become different when you understand a problem. In the way things become different when the problem understands you. When it has your name, your face, your mother's hands, your dead brother's work. And it is coming, and the only way through it is through it. And the person you were yesterday is not going to be enough for what comes next. Hale's phone lit up again. He looked at it and said nothing. "Tell me," Evelyn said. He turned to look at her. His face was the face of a man delivering news he'd rather not. O'Rourke didn't just hit the estate, he said. He hit your apartment too, Michigan Avenue, same time. She absorbed that. My drafting table, she said, not because it mattered, not because it was the important thing, but because it was the thing her mind landed on. The table Nathan had helped her carry up 3 flights of stairs the day she moved in, laughing at her for owning something that heavy, telling her she had a problem. Gone. Everything. And velour, Hale said. He hesitated. He's sending a message. Not just to Alexander. To you. She looked at him. What kind of message? That there's no version of this where you walk away neutral, he said. You're not collateral anymore. You're a target. The car moved through the dark. Her mother's hand tightened around hers. And Evelyn Hartwell, who had walked into the wrong hallway on the best night she'd had in 3 years, who had kissed a stranger to save a man she didn't know, who had spent 3 years carrying the wrong story about her brother's death, sat in the back of a car going nowhere specific, with a blue box full of evidence and no home to go back to, and felt something shift in her chest. Not fear. Not anymore. Something harder than fear. Something that didn't have a clean name, but felt like the moment before an architect tears up the original plans and starts again from the foundation, because the foundation was wrong, and she should have seen it sooner, and there is no fixing what's been built on a lie. You have to clear it and begin. She let go of her mother's hand. She picked up the blue box. She opened it. The drive had no destination for 11 minutes. Evelyn knew this because she counted. Not obsessively. Not the way she'd counted days after Nathan died, but with the deliberate focus of someone who needed a number to hold on to while everything else moved too fast to grip. 11 minutes of Corso driving in a pattern she recognized as intentional, the same streets twice, varying the speed, checking mirrors more than the road required. Hale had his phone out and was talking in low, broken sentences to someone she couldn't identify. Her mother sat beside her with the stillness of a woman who had decided, somewhere in the last 40 minutes, that stillness was the only thing she had left to offer. Evelyn had the blue box open on her knees. The drive was there. Small, matte black, the kind Nathan had favored because they were durable and cheap, and he'd always been the more practical one between them, despite being the one who kept every receipt for every coffee he'd ever expensed. She held it between her thumb and forefinger and thought about the last time she'd seen him alive, which had been a Sunday, which had been ordinary, which had been the kind of afternoon you don't know is the last one until it's already 3 years gone. Hale ended his call. I have a location, he said. Falcone's already there. Where? Corso said. Hale gave an address on the south side that meant nothing to her. Corso adjusted the route without comment. 20 minutes later, the car pulled into a parking structure that smelled of oil and cold concrete, and they went up 2 levels and stopped beside a black car she didn't recognize. And Alexander came out of the shadows between 2 support pillars the way men like him always seemed to materialize, as if they'd always been there and you'd simply failed to notice. He looked at her first, then at her mother, then at the box. Good, he said, which told her nothing, but the way he said it told her something. The particular compressed relief of a man who'd expected the night to go worse than it had. She got out. Her mother got out. Alexander looked at her mother with an expression that wasn't quite what Evelyn expected. Not the blank professional assessment he gave most things, but something more careful than that. More human. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, I'm sorry for the circumstances. Her mother looked at him for a long moment. You knew my son, she said. It wasn't a question. I knew of him, Alexander said. What I know of him is that he was very good at his work and very brave about what he found. I'm sorry I didn't move sooner on the people responsible. Her mother absorbed this. Whatever she concluded, she kept it behind her eyes. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, he said. Tonight, and however long after tonight it takes. That's not an answer, her mother said. No, he said, but it's honest. Her mother looked at Evelyn. Some conversation happened between them that didn't use words, the specific fluency of 2 people who had spent 3 years keeping each other upright. Then her mother nodded once and said nothing further. They moved to a second vehicle, larger, darker, the windows the kind that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Clara was already inside, which surprised Evelyn, and she understood then that Alexander had been moving pieces since before the estate was hit, that the preparation she was seeing now had started before she'd known it was necessary. He was always 3 moves out. She didn't know if that was reassuring or terrifying. Clara took charge of her mother with the quiet efficiency of a woman who'd handled harder things and didn't need to be asked twice. They went in that car. Evelyn stayed. She and Alexander stood in the concrete dark of the parking structure with Corso a discreet 15 feet away, and the drive in Evelyn's hand, and 2 years of evidence and 3 years of grief and one very bad Friday night between them. Nathan's drive, she said. I haven't checked what's on it yet. We will, he said. I have a secure system at the next location. Petra's already there. If the full audit is on that drive. It's there, she said. I know it's there. He looked at her. The light in the parking structure was bad. Fluorescent, old, flickering slightly near the far wall. And in it his face was all planes and shadows. He looked tired in a way he hadn't looked before. Or maybe she was just getting better at reading him. You should know, he said, what tonight is going to look like. Tell me. O'Rourke moved on 2 locations at the same time, he said. The estate and your apartment. That's not reactive. He's been planning a push, waiting for the right moment. Tonight was the moment, which means he's not going to stop. He's going to keep moving until one of you is finished, she said. Yes. She held the drive a little tighter. Do you have enough, without the drive, to move on him? Enough to act, he said. Not enough to make it permanent. Not enough to make sure it doesn't rebuild. He paused. The drive is the difference between ending O'Rourke and ending what O'Rourke built. Then let's go read the drive, she said. The next location was a building in Pilsen that looked from the outside like a commercial printing company. A sign in the window, a loading dock, dumpsters on the side. Inside it was something else. She didn't ask how long Alexander had had it or what it had been used for before tonight. Some questions were for later. She was getting better at sorting the questions into now and later. Petra had a laptop open on a folding table and 2 other screens running feeds she didn't look at directly. 3 men Evelyn hadn't seen before stood at various points in the room with the posture of people who were waiting to be told to do something and had experience being good at it. The room smelled of coffee and something electrical and the particular tension of people who'd been running hard for several hours. Evelyn sat down across from Petra and handed over the drive. Petra plugged it in, ran a scan. The progress bar moved slowly enough that Evelyn counted the seconds, and when it resolved and the file directory came up, she leaned forward and read the names of the folders. Nathan's system. She recognized it immediately. The naming convention, the date structure, the way he tagged things with abbreviations only he would have decoded without the key. She decoded them without thinking about it, the way you decode a sibling's shorthand when you've been reading it for 20 years. CFA NL SCPA was Callaway Forensic Associates, North Lakeshore account, September. Disc 3 fin was discrepancies. 3rd review, financial. Our chain was... She stopped. Our chain, she said. Open that one. Petra opened it. Inside, 43 files. Spreadsheets, scanned documents, a text file Nathan had labeled Summary Final with the kind of emphasis that meant he'd known what it was. Evelyn opened the summary file and read it while Petra read it simultaneously on her own screen, and the room around them went very quiet in the way rooms go quiet, when everyone in them understands that something significant is happening even if they can't read the screen. Nathan Hartwell had been thorough. She'd known he was thorough. He'd been thorough about everything, about grocery lists and birthday cards and the thank you notes their mother had instilled in them both. But this was something beyond thoroughness. This was the work of a man who had understood the weight of what he'd found and had documented it with the precision of someone who suspected he might not be there to explain it himself. The money trail ran through 7 entities, not 4, as Alexander's files had shown, 7. 3 of them were ones Alexander didn't have. One of them was a city contractor with a name she recognized from a development project she'd worked adjacent to at Meridian, a company called Lakeview Infrastructure Solutions, which had gotten 3 permits approved in 6 months for properties that should have taken years. She'd noted it at the time as someone knowing someone. She hadn't known what she was looking at. She knew now. Petra, she said. I see it, Petra said. The 3rd entity, Evelyn said. That's the connection to the permit office. That's how O'Rourke launders. I know, Petra said. She was already typing. I'm cross-referencing with what we have. Give me 10 minutes. Evelyn stood up. Her back ached. The drive, the parking structure, the concrete, 2 nights of bad sleep. She walked to where Alexander was standing near the far wall with Corso and a phone and said, "Nathan found 3 connections your team didn't have." He looked at her sharply. "Which ones?" She told him. Watched his face as the information settled into whatever internal structure he kept for this kind of thing. He didn't ask her to repeat herself. He listened the first time and filed it. "Lakeview Infrastructure Solutions," he said. I know what that is," she said. "I've seen their permits. I've seen their work." She paused. "One of the architects at my firm worked a project adjacent to a Lakeview site 2 years ago. If they're connected to O'Rourke's money, that means that the corruption goes into the city planning office," Alexander said. "Which you can't touch through O'Rourke alone," she said. "You cut O'Rourke off, and the planning office connection survives, and somebody else just fills the gap." He looked at her with that full, particular attention that she'd come to understand meant he was updating his model of a situation. "Yes," he said. "Nathan knew that," she said. "That's why he documented all 7. I wasn't just building a case against one organization. He was mapping the whole system." Silence. "He was going to take it to the FBI," she said. "Wasn't he? That's what the summary document is. It's a filing. He formatted it like a federal filing." "Yes," Alexander said quietly, and Morrow stopped it. Morrow stopped it. She breathed through the tightness in her chest, same as she'd done all night, same as she'd done for 3 years. The technique hadn't gotten easier. You just got more practiced at getting through the moment without coming apart, which wasn't the same thing. "So we use it," she said. "The filing. Nathan already did the work. We send it where it was supposed to go 3 years ago. It's more complicated than that. It's always more complicated than that." She met his eyes. "Tell me the complication." "If we submit Nathan's audit to federal investigators now, with O'Rourke already in motion, he'll know it's coming. He has enough people in enough places to bury it again before it gains traction, the same way Morrow buried it." He paused. "The audit needs to land alongside something O'Rourke can't control, something that proves the cover-up as well as the crime." She thought about that. "Morrow," she said. "If Morrow's payments are documented, they are, in our files. Then Morrow is the proof of the cover-up. Nathan's filing plus Morrow's payments plus the connection to Nathan's death." She stopped. Then, "Who do you trust, federally? Is there anyone?" He was quiet for a moment, the longest pause she'd seen from him on a direct question. "One person," he said. "A federal prosecutor named Ides. She's been building a RICO case against O'Rourke for 2 years. We've had communication. Careful. Nothing that could be traced." "She doesn't know about Nathan's drive," Evelyn said. "Nobody did until tonight." "Then that's where it goes," Evelyn said. "Nathan's full audit, your documentation on Morrow's payments, and whatever else Petra finds in the next 10 minutes. We get it to Ides tonight, before O'Rourke can move on it." Alexander looked at her for a long time. She couldn't tell what he was calculating. She'd gotten better at reading him over the last 36 hours, but there were still rooms in him she didn't have keys to. "That solves the legal problem," he said. "It doesn't solve tonight." "What's tonight?" His phone buzzed. He looked at it, his jaw set. "O'Rourke knows where we are," he said. The room changed immediately. Not chaos, not noise, but a sharp collective shift, like a current switching direction. Petra looked up from her screen. The 3 men against the walls moved. Corso was already at the door. "How?" Evelyn said. "Garrett again," Alexander said, his voice very flat. "He knew about this building. I hadn't used it in 8 months. I thought—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter. We have—" He looked at Corso. 6 minutes, Corso said. "Maybe 8 if they hit traffic on Cermak." "Petra," Alexander said. "Get the drive copied. Everything. 3 copies. 3 separate. Already running," Petra said. Evelyn looked around the room. Her architect's brain was already doing what it always did, reading the space, the structure, the points of failure, and the points of strength. The loading dock in the back, the single front entrance, the windows set high and small along the upper walls. One stairwell she'd seen on the way in, leading to a second floor that appeared to be storage. "How many people does O'Rourke typically send?" she said. "Enough," Corso said. "That's not a number," she said. 8 to 12, Alexander said. "For something like this." He was already moving, and the room was moving with him. the kind of coordinated motion that came from people who'd rehearsed for this without ever rehearsing for this specific moment. You and Petra take the copies and go out the back. Hale goes with you. And you, she said. I'll follow. She looked at him. He was not going to follow. She understood that immediately. Understood it in the same way she'd understood the thing about the hallway at Velour. The way he'd let her shield him while his hands did something she couldn't see. He was going to stay. He was going to meet O'Rourke's people here, in this building, with however many men he had and whatever the next few minutes held, and follow was the word he used because he needed her moving and not arguing. Don't, she said. Evelyn, don't tell me to go and then stay here, she said. Don't do that. I need you in the drive out, he said. That's what matters. What matters, she said, is that you said you'd explain and then you'd end it. You said that. Her voice was lower than she intended and steadier than she expected. End it. He held her gaze. Something moved in his face, not the ghost of a smile this time, something older and more complicated than that. Go, he said. I'll end it. Petra grabbed her arm. Come on. The back of the building was a concrete corridor that smelled of old paper and machine oil, and Hale was already at the far end of it holding a door open, and beyond him the cold night air of a Pilsen alley and the sounds of the city doing what cities do, indifferent and enormous, knowing nothing about what was happening inside this building. They were 3/4 down the corridor when Evelyn heard the front of the building come apart. Not an explosion. She'd expected an explosion. Some part of her had been braced for one, but it wasn't that. It was the sound of a door coming in fast and hard, and voices, and something heavy falling, and then a sound she couldn't categorize until later, standing in the alley, when Petra pulled her forward, and she realized what she'd heard was controlled violence, the sound of people who were very good at this doing it without wasted noise. She ran. Petra was faster than she looked. Hale was already at the end of the alley with a car she didn't recognize, engine running, somebody behind the wheel she'd never seen. She got in. Petra got in. Hale got in. The car moved. She looked back through the rear window at the building. The exterior was dark. No smoke, no visible damage. Whatever was happening inside was happening inside. She sat with the drive copy Petra had pressed into her hand and thought about Alexander, alone in that building with Corso and whoever else, meeting something that had been building toward him for 18 months. She thought about Nathan, who had sat with evidence of the same thing and not known how to make it land, and had died for the trying. She was not going to die for the trying. Petra was on her phone, not calling, typing, a series of messages that went somewhere specific. IDs? Evelyn said. Petra looked at her. Falcone gave me the contact 2 hours ago, she said. I've been building the package since we confirmed the drive contents. He planned this, Evelyn said. Before the building, he already knew. He usually knows, Petra said. Not defensively, not in admiration, just as a fact. The car made 3 turns and stopped at a different building, an apartment block, residential, the kind with a buzzer panel and a mailbox cluster in the lobby. A real building, people sleeping in it. Hale took them to the 4th floor, an apartment that was clearly a safe house. Spare, functional, no art on the walls, a kitchen with coffee supplies and canned food, and nothing personal. And Petra sat at a table and connected the drive copy to her laptop and kept building the package. And Evelyn sat across from her and told her what to cross-reference and what Nathan had meant by his shorthand, and answered every question Petra asked as fast as she could, because speed was the only thing they had left. An hour and 17 minutes after they'd left the printing building, Petra said, "It's sent." Evelyn looked up. "Everything," Petra said. Nathan's full audit, Morrow's payments, the connection to Nathan's death, Falcone's documentation on O'Rourke's operations, and a written summary that IDES can use to open a federal case tonight if she chooses to. A pause. She'll choose to. I've worked with Falcone long enough to know that IDES has been waiting for something exactly like this. Evelyn sat back. It was done, on their end. The piece of it that they could do, the piece Nathan had died trying to do, it was done. She should have felt something cleaner. She felt scraped out and wired and terrified about a man she'd known for less than 48 hours, which was irrational and also completely consistent with the last 48 hours. Her phone buzzed. Alexander's number, the one he'd given her that afternoon, which she'd put in under A because she hadn't known what else to use. She answered. "Are you out?" His voice, rougher than before, audibly rough. Yes, Petra sent the package to Ides. She paused. Are you? I'm out, he said. Corso's with me. We had a pause that she heard as physical, as the kind of gap that follows pain. It was handled. You're hurt, she said. I'm out, he said again. That's the important part. She breathed. Where are you? Coming to you. 20 minutes. Another pause. Ides got the package. She's already moving. I just heard. That fast. She's been ready for 2 years, he said. She just needed the file. Evelyn pressed her thumb and forefinger to the bridge of her nose and held them there for a moment. Morrow, she said. Federal agents picked him up 40 minutes ago, Alexander said. He's already talking, which is what scared men do. And O'Rourke, a different kind of pause. He's at the shipyard, Alexander said. His fallback location. He went there when the building push didn't... He stopped. He still has people. He still thinks he has leverage. What leverage? Silence. Alexander, she said. What leverage? He took someone, Alexander said. During the push on the building, one of my people who was there to... He stopped again, and the stop told her it was bad. Clara, he said. He took Clara. The word landed like a physical thing. Clara, who had brought files without asking why. Clara, who had looked at Evelyn checking the lock on the door and said nothing. Clara, who was somewhere in the city right now with Declan O'Rourke, being used as a reason for Alexander Falcone to do something he would otherwise never do. He wants you to come to the shipyard, Evelyn said. Not a question. He's going to call me, Alexander said. When he does, I'm going to go. Alone. That's what he'll demand. And you're going to go alone, she said. Silence. Alexander. Her voice came out harder than she intended. You cannot go alone to a man who just spent an evening trying to kill you. I can't let him keep Clara, he said. That's not... A pause. That's not something I'm willing to do. She stood up from the table, walked to the window, looked out at the Chicago night, the lights, the movement, the indifference of it. The shipyard, she said. What's it like? Industrial. Old. It's been out of use for... How big? What's the structure? He paused. Why? Because I need to understand the space, she said. Tell me what you know about it. Evelyn, you're not... Tell me what you know, she said. I'm not asking to come with you. I'm asking you to tell me about the space so I can tell you something useful. Do you trust me or don't you? The question went out and sat in the silence between them. She heard him breathe. Old dry dock facility, he said. Built in the 1930s. Steel frame, but the joints are original. Nobody's maintained them. There are 3 main structures. The dock itself, a crane housing on the east side, and a maintenance building on the north end. The crane hasn't been operational in how long? 15, 20 years. She turned away from the window. The crane housing, she said. Is it still attached to the dock structure? Yes. Why? Because a steel crane housing attached to a deteriorating dry dock frame for 15 years means the coupling joints are corroded, she said. You put enough weight on the coupling, or you disturb the base in the right way, it collapses, he said slowly. Selectively, she said. If you know where to apply the force, it's not a controlled demolition, it's just finding the point that's already failing and helping it fail faster. She paused. You need someone who understands load-bearing failure. Evelyn. I'm not saying I'm coming into the shipyard with you, she said. I'm saying that if the right person were positioned on the exterior of that facility, someone who had read the structural layout and knew where the weaknesses were, they could create enough chaos from the outside that you would not be walking into that building alone. The line was quiet for a long time. That's not a good plan, he said. It's better than yours, she said. Another silence. You said I wasn't a liability, she said. You said what I did in the hallway wasn't liability, that it was brave. She paused. Let me be useful. She heard him exhale. A rough, tired sound, the sound of a man whose reserves were running low and who had the self-awareness to know it. When I get there, he said, I'll show you the blueprints. We had them from a... He stopped. It doesn't matter where we had them from. I'll show you the blueprints. Okay, she said. And then we talk about it, he said. And if what you see doesn't line up, If what I see doesn't line up, I'll tell you, she said. I'm not going to romanticize this. I'm an architect who hasn't slept in 2 days, but I'm a very good architect. She heard something move through the line. Not quite a laugh. Not quite, not one either. I know, he said. I read your file. 20 minutes, she said. 20 minutes, he agreed. She hung up, looked at Petra across the table. Petra was looking back at her with that expression she'd seen more than once tonight. Not quite respect, the thing before respect, the thing you feel when someone does something that changes your model of what they're capable of. You're going to the shipyard, Petra said. We're going to the shipyard, Evelyn said. That's not… I know, Evelyn said. Tell me everything you have on the structural layout of the facility. Petra held her gaze for a moment. Then she opened a new window on her laptop and started pulling files, because she was a woman who understood when a decision had already been made. The blueprints came up on screen, scanned, old, the lines faded but legible. And Evelyn leaned over the table and looked at them the way she looked at every structural drawing, with the specific attention of someone who had spent years learning to see not what was drawn, but what the drawing meant. Where the weight went, where the load transferred, where the joints were and what kind of load they were rated for, and what 15 years of corrosion did to a rating. She found what she was looking for in 4 minutes. The crane housing's east coupling joint, the connection between the crane mount and the main dock frame, rated for a load the crane no longer exerted, sitting at the intersection of 2 deteriorating structural members, accessible from the exterior on the northeast corner of the facility. She pressed her finger to the screen. There, she said. Petra looked at her. You're sure? I'm sure, she said. That joint goes, the crane housing goes with it, and it takes the east wall of the dock structure down. Not explosively, progressively. It'll give anyone inside enough warning to get clear, but it'll bring O'Rourke's perimeter apart. And you, Petra said, if you're on the northeast exterior when that joint fails. I'll be far enough back, Evelyn said. That's not a measurement. It's the measurement I have right now, Evelyn said. She straightened up. Her back ached. Her eyes felt like they'd been open for a week. She thought about Clara, somewhere in that building with a man who'd ordered Nathan killed, and thought leverage was something you held over people rather than something you built. She thought about what Alexander had said in the study, standing next to Nathan's files with his hands controlled and his voice quiet, and his eyes carrying something ancient and tired. Sometimes that's what brave looks like. She looked at the blueprint one more time. Then she folded her hands together, pressed them flat, and waited for the sound of Alexander's car in the street below, and the 20 minutes that stood between this moment and the end of everything that had been moving toward this since a Friday night in the wrong hallway of a bar she'd never go back to, carrying a name she'd borrowed without knowing the weight of it, kissing a stranger to keep him alive long enough to change everything she thought she knew about why her brother died, and what it was going to cost to make it right. The city hummed outside the window. She waited. Alexander arrived in 19 minutes. Evelyn heard the car before she saw it. The particular sound of an engine that had been pushed hard and not quite recovered. A roughness at idle that hadn't been there before. She was at the window when the headlights cut across the building face below, and she watched him get out of the passenger side, which told her something, and watched the way he moved across the sidewalk, which told her more. He was favoring his left side. Not dramatically. Not the way people moved in films when they'd been hurt, the exaggerated lean, the hand pressed to the wound. Just a slight conservation of motion on the left, a tightening when he turned. The specific economy of a man who had learned to manage pain by not giving it more space than it needed. He came upstairs. Knocked. She opened the door. The left side of his face had a cut above the cheekbone. Not deep, already dried. The kind of thing that happens when something passes close enough to mark you without finishing the job. His jacket was gone. The dark shirt had a tear at the shoulder she hadn't seen over the phone. His eyes were the same as they always were. Dark, measuring, present. But the tiredness in them had a different quality now. Not the tiredness of a long night. The tiredness of a man who had been close to something and come back from it and was still deciding what that meant. He looked at her, then at the blueprints on the table, then at Petra, who looked back at him without expression. You found it, he said. Not a question. He was reading her face. Northeast coupling joint, she said. I'll show you. They stood at the table together and she walked him through it. The load ratings, the corrosion vectors, the specific physics of a progressive structural failure versus a sudden one. He listened the way he always listened, fully, without performing it. He asked two questions, both precise, both the right ones. She answered them. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. If you're on the northeast exterior, he said, and you create the failure, the joint goes, the housing comes down. You have approximately 40 seconds before the secondary structure follows. If you're not clear of the fall zone in 40 seconds, I'll be clear, she said. That requires you to run, he said, in the dark, across ground you've never seen. I'll have seen it on the blueprint, she said. A blueprint is not, I know what a blueprint is, she said. I've been reading them for 10 years. I understand the difference between a drawing and a space. I'm not going to stand there and watch it fall on me. He held her eyes. She held his back. This had become a thing they did. The held eye contact, the waiting, the particular language of two people learning to trust each other under conditions that were terrible for trust building and somehow kept producing it anyway. Corso goes with you, he said. He doesn't leave your side. Agreed. And if anything goes wrong on your end, if anything goes wrong on my end, you'll know because the east wall will still be standing, she said. That's your signal. He looked at her for one more moment, then he nodded. They left at 11:40. The shipyard was on the far south side, past the industrial corridor, down roads that got progressively older and less maintained, the kind of infrastructure that cities let age past the point of repair because the money always went somewhere else. Evelyn sat in the back of the car with Corso beside her, and the blueprint folded in her lap, and her hands flat on her thighs, not wringing them, not pressing them together, just flat, feeling her own pulse through her palms and counting it down. Alexander rode in a separate vehicle ahead of them. That had been his arrangement. She and Corso would approach the northeast perimeter on foot from the side street, 2 blocks east, while his car approached the main entrance directly. O'Rourke had called, as predicted, had demanded Alexander come alone. Alexander had said yes, which was true in the technical sense that he was the only one going through the front door. She'd asked him, in the parking lot below the safe house, before they'd gotten into separate cars, "What happens to Clara when you go in? What's the sequence?" "I talked to O'Rourke," he'd said. "I keep him talking, long enough for you to reach the joint." "And if he doesn't want to talk?" "He wants to talk," Alexander had said. "That's why he took Clara instead of just—" He'd stopped. "He wants an audience for this. He wants to be the man who finally broke me. Men like O'Rourke need the moment. They need the other person to see it happen." A pause. "I'll give him the moment." "And then?" He'd looked at her with something in his eyes she still didn't have a name for, something that had been building since the hallway at Velour and had accumulated with every hour since, heavy and specific, and not at all what she'd expected when she'd walked into the wrong corridor of a bar on the best Friday she'd had in 3 years. "And then it ends," he'd said. Now the car slowed. Corso put a hand on her arm, not restraining, just marking the moment. 2 blocks, he said. "We walk from here." She got out. The night was cold for August. A front had moved through while they'd been in the safe house, dropping the temperature 15 degrees, and the wind off the lake came straight through the industrial corridor with nothing to slow it. She could smell water and rust, and the particular flat smell of old concrete that had absorbed decades of weather. The shipyard was dark against the sky ahead. 3 structures she recognized from the blueprint, the main dock and the crane housing and the maintenance building. The crane housing taller than the rest, a steel frame that had been engineered for a load it hadn't carried in a generation. She and Corso moved along the side street without lights, without talking. He'd brought a small flashlight but kept it off. Her eyes were adjusting, and she was navigating by the blueprint she'd memorized, the distances, the layout, the position of the northeast corner relative to the street. Corso was a man of very few words on a normal occasion, and this was not a normal occasion, and she was grateful for the silence because she needed all of her attention for the ground in front of her and the structure ahead. At the perimeter fence, chain link, old, sagging in the middle, the way fences sag when nobody has maintained them for years. Corso pulled back a section that had already been cut recently, the edges still bright. She went through first. He followed. The ground inside the perimeter was broken concrete and compacted gravel and weeds that had found their way through both, and she moved across it carefully, feeling each footfall before committing to it, keeping the crane housing in her sight line to the right and the main dock structure to her left. The blueprint was accurate. The distances were right. She'd been afraid they wouldn't be, that the scan had been imprecise, or that structures had shifted in ways not reflected in the drawings. But it matched, which meant the joint she was looking for was where she'd calculated. Ahead, through the walls of the main dock building, she could see light. Not bright, a generator running something portable, the yellow light of work lamps. She heard voices, low, indistinct. She heard Alexander's voice, and then a different voice, accented, harder edged, the voice of a man who had spent 20 years being the most dangerous thing in the room and had come to confuse that with being the smartest thing in the room. O'Rourke. She kept moving. The northeast corner of the crane housing was exactly where the blueprint said it was, which she'd known it would be and was still relieved to confirm. The coupling joint was visible even in the dark. She'd known what to look for, and she found it. The junction of the crane mount and the dock frame, a steel connection plate the size of a door, bolted through both members, and the bolts were what she'd expected, corroded. Not crumbling, not failed, but corroded in the specific way of metal that had carried less load than it was rated for over a long period, developing rust in the thread channels and around the plate edges, the kind of corrosion that reduced a bolt rated for 8 tons to something that would fail at 4. She didn't need it to fail at 4 tons. She needed it to fail at 2. She looked at Corso. He was reading her face, waiting. "I need something heavy," she said, 10 kilos minimum, "and I need a way to apply it with leverage at the base of that plate there." She pointed. "The lower left corner, that's where the stress concentration is." Corso looked at the joint, looked at the surroundings. Then he moved, quietly, efficiently, to a pile of old equipment 30 feet away and came back with a steel bar, 3 feet long, substantial. He also had a length of chain. "The chain around the base of the mount," she said. "Loop it and hook the bar through. When I pull the bar, the chain applies lateral force to the mount base." She was already calculating. "The mount base moves, the plate stress concentrates on the lower bolts, and the lower bolts fail first. Once 2 bolts fail, the rest go in sequence." "How long?" Corso said. "Seconds, once it starts." She looked at him. "When I say run, we run." "I know how to run," he said, which was the most words she'd heard him say consecutively. They set the chain. It took 4 minutes, cold hands, corroded metal, the chain threading around the base of the mount in the dark, with only Corso's flashlight, kept low and brief, to guide them. Inside the building, Alexander's voice had gotten louder. Not panicked. She didn't think he was capable of panicked, but deliberate in the way you raise your voice when you need someone to keep paying attention to you. He was buying time. She moved faster. The bar was through the chain. She gripped it, the steel cold enough to burn through her palms, her hands immediately aching, and looked at Corso, who had positioned himself beside her and slightly back, and nodded. She pulled. The first pull got nothing. She'd expected that. The chain needed to seat against the mount before it could apply force, and she needed to find the angle. She adjusted, replanted her feet, pulled again with her whole body, legs driving, back straight, the way you move a load that doesn't want to move. And this time she felt something give. Not the bolt, not yet, but the chain seating, the system engaging, the force transmitting. She pulled a third time, and heard a sound she'd heard before only in controlled demolition videos. A low metallic groan that wasn't loud but was fundamental, the sound of steel under stress that it was not going to survive. "Now," she said. Corso was already moving. She dropped the bar and ran. The ground was broken and dark, and her lungs were burning before she'd covered 30 feet, and she counted in her head. 1, 2, 3, because she'd told herself 40 seconds, and she was going to use every one of them to get clear. Corso was beside her, matching her pace, and she ran with the blueprint in her head, the fall zone she'd identified, the safe margin she'd calculated. At 20 seconds, she heard the joint fail. Not the crash, the crack first, the high metallic report of a bolt shearing, and then a second one, and then the groan became something else, became the deep grinding complaint of a structure that had stopped holding and started falling, and she ran harder, past the perimeter fence gap, through it, onto the side street, and then the sound behind her became enormous. She'd calculated progressive failure. She'd been right about the sequence, the lower bolts first, then the upper, then the coupling plate separating from the frame. But the secondary collapse was faster than she'd modeled, the crane housing coming down not as a controlled lean, but as a rotation, the steel frame twisting as it fell, the east wall of the dock structure receiving the load and beginning to fail along its own fault lines, and the sound of it, the compressing, grinding, tearing sound of several hundred tons of old steel finding the ground, was the loudest thing she'd ever been near. She stopped running, turned, looked. The east wall of the dock structure was down. The crane housing was down. Dust and debris were still moving through the cold air, billowing in the generator light that somehow still burned in the interior of the main building. Corso was beside her, breathing hard. "Clara," Evelyn said. "Falcone knows what that sound means," Corso said. "He'll move." She looked at the structure. The northeast perimeter was gone. The east approach was open. The wall that had stood between the exterior and the interior of the main building was now horizontal, creating a chaos of debris and open sightlines. O'Rourke's perimeter had just lost its east side entirely. She heard shouting from inside, then running. Then two of O'Rourke's men came out through the debris gap. Not toward her, not organized, just running, the specific motion of people whose tactical situation had just collapsed along with the wall. Corso moved, fast and deliberate. She watched him handle the two men with an economy she didn't look away from because she was past the point of looking away from things. 30 seconds, both down, Corso adjusting his grip on something he'd been carrying that she hadn't asked about and wasn't going to. She was already moving toward the debris gap. Corso caught her arm. "You wait," he said. "Clara." "You wait," he said again. "You've done your part. You wait." She stopped. She breathed. She stood in the cold at the edge of the fallen wall and watched the dust settle and listened to what was happening inside and counted her own heartbeats, which were fast and unsteady and completely uninterested in her attempts to slow them. Then she heard Alexander's voice, not raised, not strained, just his voice saying one word, a name, a command, and then Clara's voice, and then footsteps on debris. Clara came through the gap first, dust on her clothes, her face tight with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anger, but was the particular expression of a woman who had been through something and was already in the process of deciding how she was going to carry it. She saw Evelyn and stopped for one beat, then kept moving, because that was also the expression of a woman who understood that stopping was for later. Alexander came through second. He had blood on his shirt, more than before, on the right side now, and he was moving. But the conservation was worse than it had been in the parking lot below the safe house. He came through the gap and looked at her. And the look lasted a long time, containing things that neither of them had words for yet, and probably wouldn't for a while. "O'Rourke," she said. "Inside," he said. "He's not going anywhere." She understood what he meant. She didn't ask him to explain it. Some things you accept as the cost of the world being what it is, and the night being what it had been, and the man beside you being who he is, and you file them in the place where you keep the things you can't change, and you keep moving. They moved. The next 4 hours were a different kind of exhausting. The administrative exhaustion of aftermath, which Evelyn had always found harder than the thing itself. Federal agents arrived at the shipyard at 12:40, which meant Ides had been moving since Petra sent the package, had been ready, had been building toward this for long enough that the first call from Petra's encrypted line had been all she needed. There were a lot of them. There were vehicles and lights, and the specific organized noise of people doing something large and practiced. And Evelyn stood at the perimeter of it with a thermal blanket someone had pressed into her hands and watched it happen. She gave a statement. Not tonight. Tonight, a federal agent whose name she caught as Hendricks told her she'd be needed in the morning. That tonight she should go somewhere, get some rest, be reachable. She said yes to all of it. Her mother was at a hotel 3 miles away, in a room Alexander's people had arranged, with Clara, who had insisted on being the one to stay with her. Evelyn called. Her mother answered on the first ring, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either, and they talked for 4 minutes, which was long enough to confirm that they were both alive and not long enough for anything else, and they agreed on later and hung up. She found Alexander at the edge of the scene, apart from the federal activity, standing near one of his cars with his phone in his hand and his eyes on something in the middle distance. Someone had cleaned the cut on his face, not properly, just field cleaned, the way you do when a proper job has to wait. The right side was worse than she'd seen in the building gap. She could see the shape of it now, something that would need attention, and she filed that too. She walked over. He looked at her when she was close enough that looking was the natural thing. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. They stood side by side for a moment, not touching, looking at the same middle distance. The shipyard lights. The federal vehicles. The structure she'd brought down, which was still settling in the way old buildings settle. Small sounds in the debris. Things finding their final position. "Morrow is talking," he said. "Hendricks told me before you came over. He gave them the name of the city official who approved O'Rourke's permits. He gave them 2 more names above that." He paused. "Nathan's report is going to do what Nathan intended it to do." She breathed. The cold air came in and went out, and she let it do what it needed to do, which was keep her grounded in the physical fact of right now, this moment, standing on this ground. 3 years, she said. "Yes." "He died for something that mattered and nobody knew," she said. "For 3 years nobody knew." "You knew," Alexander said. "You always knew it wasn't random. You just didn't have the proof." She thought about that. About the 3 years of carrying the wrong story, the robbery that wasn't a robbery, the bad luck that wasn't luck. She'd always known, somewhere under the grief and the practical business of surviving it, that it hadn't been right. That the neat explanation had too many loose threads. She'd been afraid of the loose threads because the alternative was something too large to hold. Now she'd held it. And it hadn't broken her. Hadn't broken her yet, anyway. She was realistic enough to know that some things broke you slowly, that the full weight of a thing didn't always arrive at once. "I want to visit his grave," she said. "Tomorrow, or whenever this is over enough to do that." "We can do that," he said. She looked at him. The we had come out naturally, without apparent thought, the way things come out when someone has stopped calculating what they're saying. She noted it. She didn't comment on it. "You need someone to look at that," she said, meaning the right side. "I'll have someone look at it." "Tonight," she said. "Not eventually." He looked at her with that almost not quite expression. "Tonight," he agreed. She looked back at the shipyard. One of the federal vehicles was pulling out, and then another, and the activity was beginning to compact into the specific organized efficiency of people who had done a large thing and were now doing the smaller things that followed it. Hendricks passed at a distance, caught Evelyn's eye, nodded. A nod that contained more than a nod usually contained. The specific acknowledgement of someone who understood what the night had cost. She nodded back. "What happens now?" she said. Not to Alexander specifically, more to the general question of what came after a night like this, what the morning looked like, what a person did with herself when the emergency was over and the structure that had been holding everything in place suddenly had no more weight to carry. "What do you want to happen?" Alexander said. She considered the question seriously, because he'd asked it seriously. "I want to go back to work," she said. "At some point, Meridian or somewhere like it. I want to draw buildings. I want to think about load distribution and sight lines and how the light moves through a space in the late afternoon." She paused. "I want to call Marcus and tell him I'm sorry for the short notice." "You can do all of that," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking permission." "I know you're not," he said. She looked at him again, this man she'd known for less than 3 days, and who felt, in the strange compressed way of extreme circumstances, like someone she'd been reading for much longer. "You're going to be different now," she said. "Whatever comes next, the federal case, the restructuring of your operation without O'Rourke applying pressure, all of it, it's going to require different things from you than what you've been doing." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that an observation or a suggestion?" "Both," she said. He looked at the ground, a brief private look, the kind that happened when someone was actually sitting with something instead of processing it for an audience. Then he looked back up. "I've been running the same operation for 12 years, he said. "The same framework, the same logic." A pause. "Some of it is going to change whether I want it to or not, because of tonight." "Some of it you could change on purpose," she said. "That's different. That's yours." He held her eyes. The look lasted long enough to be uncomfortable and then passed through uncomfortable into something else, something that didn't have a social name for what it was. "There's something I want to say to you," he said. "And I'm aware that the timing is bad," she said. "Bad," he agreed. "Say it anyway," she said. "I've been working with bad timing since Friday." He was quiet for a moment, gathering the words the way he always did, the specific patience of a man who believed that language used carelessly did damage. "You walked into that hallway," he said, "because you saw something wrong and you couldn't not act on it. You didn't know me. You had no reason to do anything except back out the door. And you didn't." "I know what I did," she said. "I know you know. I'm not explaining it back to you." He paused. "I'm telling you that in 12 years, I have not had a single person in my life who did something like that without knowing what it would cost them, without weighing the cost first." He met her eyes steadily. "You weighed nothing. You just moved." She thought about that, about whether it was true. In the hallway in this moment before her feet carried her forward, had she weighed it? She'd run the calculation fast and wrong, yes. She'd misread the situation entirely. But the impulse underneath the calculation, the one that said you cannot watch this happen, that hadn't been a calculation at all. "Nathan was the same way," she said. "He found something he wasn't supposed to find, and he documented every piece of it and sent it up the chain because he couldn't not. Even knowing—" She stopped. "I don't know how much he knew about the risk." "He knew enough," Alexander said quietly. "The documentation suggests he knew someone might come for it. The way he backed it up, the redundancy, the filing format." He paused. "He was trying to make sure it survived, even if he didn't." She closed her eyes for one moment, just one, then opened them. "He succeeded," she said. "He succeeded," Alexander said. 3 years late, but he succeeded. The thermal blanket had warmed through, and she was grateful for it in a way she hadn't been when it was first pressed on her, when she'd been too full of adrenaline to feel the cold. Now she felt it. Now she felt most things, the accumulated cost of the night arriving in her body the way cost always did. Once the emergency ended, once the structure of crisis stopped holding everything else up, and all the deferred sensations came back at once. She was tired in a way that went past physical. She was hollow, in the specific way you get hollow when you've spent yourself entirely on something and are standing now in what's left. She was also, underneath all of that, something she didn't have a clean word for. Not relief. Relief was too simple, too clean. Something more like the feeling of a load-bearing question finally getting its answer. The structural integrity of her understanding of her own life had been built on a wrong assumption for 3 years, and now the assumption was corrected, and the grief was still there, would always be there. But it sat differently now. It had its proper shape. She knew what it was the grief of. She would need time with that. A lot of time. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise. "I should go check on my mother," she said. "I'll have someone drive you." "I know your people," she said. "I'll take Corso." He almost smiled. The real version this time. Not the ghost of one. Not the reflex he'd mostly unlearned. Just the beginning of one, the shape of it, arriving on a face that had been through a considerable amount in the last few hours and was somehow still capable of it. "He'll complain," Alexander said. "He complains silently," she said. "That's fine." She started to walk, then stopped, turned back. "Get the right side looked at," she said. "Tonight. I mean it." "I know you mean it," he said. "Good." She looked at him for a moment. The cut, the exhaustion, the particular way he was standing that she'd learned to read as a man carrying pain he'd decided not to mention. "I'll call you tomorrow." "I'll answer," he said. She walked to where Corso was leaning against the car with his arms folded, not complaining, silently or otherwise, because there was nothing yet to complain about. He looked at her when she approached. She looked back. Some assessment passed between them, the way assessments pass between people who had run through a collapsed building perimeter together in the dark. "Hotel," she said. He opened the car door. She got in. The drive to the hotel took 22 minutes. She spent them looking out the window at Chicago, doing what Chicago always did. Existing on its own terms, loud and cold and enormous, and not particularly interested in the individual dramas occurring within its borders. She'd loved this city since she was old enough to understand what loving a city meant. She loved it still. It hadn't done anything to her. It had just been itself, and the things that had happened in it had happened because of people, which was always the reason, which was never the city's fault. Nathan had loved it too. He'd said once, they'd been on a bridge over the river, one of those summer evenings when everything smelled of water and the light went golden and the city looked better than it had any right to. He'd said, this place is too big to give up on. She'd asked him what he meant, and he'd said he didn't entirely know, just that some places deserved the fight, deserved people who cared enough to do the hard thing when the hard thing was what the city needed. She told him he was being romantic, he'd said, probably. But I'm also right. She put her hand flat against the cold window glass, held it there for a moment, then pulled it back. The hotel was a mid-range place in the South Loop, clean and anonymous, and exactly the kind of hotel that didn't ask questions about late arrivals with thermal blankets and no luggage. Corso pulled up to the entrance, killed the engine, and waited. "You don't have to come in," she said. "I'll wait until you're inside," he said. She got out. At the entrance, she turned and looked at the car for a moment. At Corso, at the city beyond him, at the sky beginning its slow anonymous shift toward the gray of very early morning. Then she went inside. Her mother was in room 412. She knocked, 2 short, 1 long, 2 short, and heard movement inside. And then the door opened and her mother stood there in the hotel bathrobe, with her reading glasses still on and the blue box on the nightstand and an expression on her face that contained everything the night had asked of her and had not broken under. They stood in the doorway for a moment. Then her mother said, "You need a shower." Evelyn laughed. It came out unexpected, a little ragged at the edges, the kind of laugh that lives close to the other thing, and her mother pulled her inside, and Evelyn sat on the edge of the hotel bed, and her mother sat beside her, and they were quiet for a while, the way people are quiet, when there's too much to say, for any of it to go first. "Tell me," her mother said finally. "Tell me what happened to Nathan." So Evelyn told her. All of it. The report, the 7 entities, Morrow and the suppression, the payments, the connection to O'Rourke's operation, and what O'Rourke's operation was. She told it steadily, and she told it true, without softening it, because her mother was not a woman who needed things softened. Her mother had buried a husband and then a son and had gone on growing the garden and correcting papers and making the Sunday dinner that Nathan and Evelyn had always come home for. And she was not fragile, had never been fragile, had just been carrying something too heavy for too long with the wrong shape to it. Her mother listened with her hands in her lap and her face very still. When Evelyn finished, the room was quiet for a long time. "He knew," her mother said finally, "that it might be dangerous." "I think so," Evelyn said. "The way he documented it, he was trying to make sure it got out even if he couldn't deliver it himself." Her mother was quiet again. Then, "He would have told me it was nothing if I'd asked. He always told me things were nothing when they were something because he thought I couldn't handle the something." She paused. "He was wrong about that." "I know," Evelyn said. "So were you," her mother said, gentle, accurate. "For 3 years." "I know," Evelyn said again. Her mother reached over and took her hand. They sat like that, in the hotel room in the very early morning, with the blue box on the nightstand and the city outside doing its city things, and the weight of 3 years slowly beginning to redistribute itself into a shape that could be carried differently. Not lighter, never lighter, just different. The shower her mother had recommended took 15 minutes and left her feeling less hollow, which was something. She borrowed clothes from her mother's bag, the overnight bag her mother had packed with the decade-long efficiency of a woman who'd always known emergencies were real, and sat at the small table by the window while her mother finally slept, finally allowing herself that, and watched the sky go from gray to the particular thin gold of early morning. She thought about the drive, which was now in federal hands, about Nathan's handwriting on the documents inside it, the neat, precise print, the specific abbreviations, the summary. Final, with its emphasis that had turned out to be exactly right. She thought about the fact that his work was going to do what he'd built it to do, was already doing it, was in the hands of people with the authority to make it permanent. She thought about Vincent Morrow, who had taken money to bury a dead man's work, and who was now in a room somewhere talking to federal agents, paying the cost of that in the coin of everything he'd spent 20 years building. She thought about Garrett, who had sold his loyalty for something she'd never know the value of, and who would answer for it. She thought about Clara, who had sat across from her in the east wing of the estate explaining intelligence operations with the specificity of a woman who had been doing this for a long time, and who had been taken to a shipyard and had come out of it with her spine straight and her eyes clear. And she thought about Alexander. The way he'd said we can do that when she'd mentioned Nathan's grave without thinking about it, the pronoun arriving naturally. The way he'd stood at the edge of the federal scene with his phone in his hand and his eyes on the middle distance, and had let her stand beside him without either of them needing to explain why that was where they both were. The thing between them had no clean name yet. It was too new and too compressed, and had been formed under conditions that were not representative of normal life, which meant neither of them could fully trust their read of it. She knew that. She also knew that the conditions, however extreme, had not manufactured the thing, had just accelerated the exposure of it, the way heat doesn't create properties in metal, only reveals them. She'd think about it properly later. There was a category of things that needed to be thought about later, and that was in it, and she was going to honor the category. At 6:42, her phone rang. She answered without looking at the screen. "How's the right side?" she said. A pause. 12 stitches, Alexander said, but the doctor seemed personally offended by the timeline. "Good," she said. "How's your mother?" "Sleeping," she said. "Finally. And you?" She looked out the window at the city going gold in the morning light, at the skyline she'd been drawing since she was a student. The shape she knew, the way you know something you've studied until it becomes instinct, until you stop seeing it as something external and start seeing it as something you carry inside you. Chicago, too big to give up on. "I'm awake," she said. "That's not what I asked." She considered the question, the real version of it, the one underneath the word how. "I'm in process," she said. "I think that's the honest answer. I'm somewhere in the middle of something that hasn't finished yet." "The middle is okay," he said. I know, she said. "I've been in the middle before." A brief silence, the kind that had something in it. "Nathan's grave," he said. "When you're ready." "When I'm ready," she said. She looked at the window, at the gold light on the glass, at her own faint reflection in it, tired, awake, unbroken, the gray dress replaced by her mother's borrowed sweater. The Falcone name she'd borrowed in a hallway now returned but leaving something behind in its place, the way borrowed things sometimes do. "Alexander," she said. "Yes." "Thank you," she said. "For the coffee that first morning. When you didn't know how I took it, and you guessed anyway." Another pause, longer this time. She heard him decide something, whatever he decided, and then he said, "You were right that it was wrong." "I know," she said, "but you tried." She hung up. Outside, Chicago kept going. The light kept moving. Her mother breathed steadily in the bed behind her, finally resting, finally allowed to. Evelyn sat at the window with her hands flat on her knees and felt the morning come in around her and thought about structures, about what they were built for and what they could survive, and how the ones that lasted were never the ones that refused to flex, but the ones that had been designed honestly, built from what was actually true about the ground they stood on, able to hold weight not because they were perfect, but because they knew exactly where their limits were and had accounted for them. She thought about drawing something, not today, not yet, but soon. She thought about Michigan Avenue and the drafting table that was gone now and the print that wasn't gone, that was wrapped in a sweater in a bag in the trunk of Corso's car, Nathan's Christmas gift, the one she'd packed without entirely knowing why. She knew why now. Some things you take because you understand, even when you don't understand that you understand, that they're going to need to survive what comes next. That they're the thread you'll follow back, when the emergency ends and the structure of crisis stops holding everything up, and you have to figure out what kind of person you are now, and what kind of life that person is going to build. She was good at building things. She was going to be okay. The sun came up over Chicago, and Evelyn Hartwell sat in a hotel window and watched it, and breathed, and let the morning be what it was.